All right, what's going on? Can you hear me?
Hey, I'm here.
Hey,
Yes, I can hear you.
what's up? What's up?
Not too much.
Cool, cool. So
Yeah,
I,
so I mean, yeah, I've been going over. I don't know if you're familiar with Algo Expert. I feel like it's very similar to like what you're kind of doing front end interview or not, just interviews in general kind of thing. And I bought like their front end course as well. So I've been doing that for JavaScript. Um, and yeah,
nice, nice. Cool. How's that
pretty
going?
much trying to
Front.
like reinforce.
What is it?
Got it?
Algo expert.
Yeah, yeah. So I would see the ads on YouTube all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, it was $80 a year, and I was like, all right, like, why not? Like, let's
Yeah.
give it a shot. Um, and it's way like, kind of sucks, like in that it's good, but I feel like it's so much more thorough and in depth than my coding bootcamp was in JavaScript.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm learning like brand new things, but the way that you explained big O notation, like made it click for me. So I'm like, all right, I just need someone to like, I don't know, I want like that double reinforcement of the learning here. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to check this out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think using multiple methods is definitely the way to go, too. What's up, Christina?
Maybe.
Hi,
How are ya?
I'm good. How are you all?
Pretty good, pretty good. Hey, Alex, is that Algo expert? Is that created by that dude Tech with Tim?
Um, it I think he works together like in conjunction with it, but the guy that created it was Clement. I can't even pronounce his last name. Um, but I've seen the Tech with Tim guy on some of the videos, like on their content.
Oh yeah, Clement. Yeah, he has a YouTube channel too. Okay,
Hmm.
cool.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, there he is, Tim. Yeah, he has his YouTube channel. Cool, cool, nice. I love his stuff. He's good.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. I just I like the guide. Like I'm sure you've heard, like it's very easy to get caught in tutorial hell.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know,
Yes.
just exactly.
Yes,
So
I
like
agree.
I would just be clicking on stuff all day. I'm like, oh damn, like it's just so easy to get ADHD. Like, all right, I've got the gist of this video, and then you just keep clicking. Like, oh damn, like I've spent like a couple months, and how much have I learned? So
I
I want
know.
like a structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I hate like with it's self-guided kind of because it's just like I jump from one topic to the next and just not finishing with like going through the tutorial.
Exactly, exactly. And then you like never really solidified what you thought you were trying to learn to begin with. So I
Yeah.
feel like this like kind of like peer coding together. Um, a massive benefit. And I want to bring that up in interviews too, to be honest. Like, okay, I found a group in my free time. That's what I've been working at.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, things like that.
So today I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a PowerPoint that I've been creating. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that's like, I have a full training that's like 15 or 20% PowerPoint and then like 80 to 85% just code. So you actually get to see the code typed out, and I encourage everyone to code along and kind of type it out as I go along as well. But that training's not done yet, so I'm gonna give you just like a little piece of the PowerPoint presentation because I've never been one for PowerPoint presentations, but I think it can be useful if you're building visual slides that actually like communicate the message and teach things that are typically not taught in other boot camps. And then, so I'm going to give you a little piece of that, and then the rest is going to be all hands on. And same thing. The thing with me is, I don't want to give a training that is similar to any other trainings. Like, I've done a lot of tutorials, I've watched a lot of YouTube videos, all that stuff, just to collect information in different areas of web development. But my thing is, like, I don't want to spend time teaching, like, declaring variables with let and const. There's 10,000 resources out there that teach people how to do that. So it's not like I won't stop and explain it if somebody's not quite there and they're like, hey, what's that let keyword? I'll explain it. Like, I'll slow down just to take a little detour and explain it if somebody asks. But I really want to kind of like pitch things and communicate things and do things in a way that just hasn't been done before, as hands-on as possible, as practical as possible. And really, I want to show more of, I would say, the environment you're going to be functioning in, and give you like a real map of web development. So I'm doing my best to do that. So this is like a newer training. You guys are really the first ones getting this training. So I'm going to be looking for tons of feedback and all that stuff. But yeah, we could get right to it unless either of you have any questions before we start off.
Excited to get started.
Cool. All right, let me share my screen and then I'll go into the PowerPoint. It's like 6 or 7 slides maybe. And then it's only you two this time. I'm expecting this to be the smallest class. As far as the introduction to JavaScript and web development trainings go, I expect it to grow week over week. So definitely take advantage of it. If you guys have any questions, I'll do my best to answer those questions for you. If I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you and we could find out together. But yeah, let's do it. So can you guys see my screen?
I just see watch stream.
Okay, double click on my name.
Yeah. Well, that was dumb. Okay. Yeah,
Nah,
I'm sorry.
you're
This
good.
is the first time ever using Discord, so sorry.
Oh, I remember when I first signed up to. I'm still learning, and I've been on it for a couple of years now, so no sweat.
Yeah, I just assumed it was just supposed to automatically start. I didn't realize I had to click it, so my bad.
Yeah. Nah, you'll be a Discord pro before you know it.
No judgment here.
Yeah, definitely not. All right, so this is an introduction to JavaScript training. The purpose of this training is just to give you an overview of JavaScript and really help you understand just JavaScript in general. I sort of want to give you a map of some of the characteristics of JavaScript and also help you understand a few of the features of JavaScript. I also want to cover a couple things like what's the difference between JavaScript and Node.js, because a lot of people ask that, and also what's the difference between JavaScript and TypeScript. So I'll dabble just a teeny bit in that, although we're not going to be going into Node and we're not going to be going into TypeScript until like way later. So as you may know, JavaScript is the programming language of the web. So the majority of websites use JavaScript. It's a very high percentage, and all modern web browsers on desktop, tablets, and phones include JavaScript interpreters, making JavaScript the most deployed language in history. So when you open up a website in Safari, Firefox, Chrome, Edge, Opera, there's going to be JavaScript in there. You could turn JavaScript off if you want to, but then there's going to be no functionality in your website, and it's just going to be HTML and CSS. So this course is going to be focused on JavaScript in the browser and really understanding the browser environment. So what is the difference between Node.js and JavaScript? Do either of you have an idea?
But Node.js is server side.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, nope. I was going to get it completely wrong. I thought Node.js was like a JavaScript library.
Yeah, you could consider Node.js a JavaScript framework. Yeah, because it's built with JavaScript. So when we're talking about front-end web development, we're talking about JavaScript in the browser. So JavaScript in like the previous slides we had, Safari, Google Chrome, Edge, that sort of thing. And so before Node.js came out, JavaScript was basically trapped in the browser. The only place that JavaScript was used was inside the browser. It wasn't used in the file system. It wasn't used on the operating system. It wasn't used to build other applications like Microsoft Word or games or any of that stuff unless those applications were in the browser. Before Node.js came, JavaScript was essentially locked in the browser. But someone, Ryan Dahl, I believe his name was, he came up with Node.js, which is C language. If you dig deep enough into the the code base of Node, you're going to find some C programming language and C++ very quickly. But on top of it, it's JavaScript. So the language that you're coding with is JavaScript, but underneath the surface, it's all a lower level language like C and C++. And that's what allows you, that's what allowed JavaScript to escape the browser. So now there's a language called Node.js where you could build word processors, you could build spreadsheets, you could build databases, you could build computer games. And there are operating system functionality, there's file system functionality, there's like CPU thread functionality, there's cluster functionality, which is more CPU functionality. So basically, instead of being trapped in the browser and communicating with the browser, Node.js is a language that communicates with the operating system. So it was freed from the browser, and now it could communicate with on the server side or on the operating system side, like Java and Python and these other backend languages as well. This course is going to be focused on JavaScript in the browser.
Can I ask a question with that though?
Sure.
So why the need for Node.js versus like any of the other languages that already existed? Like, what is it? Just because there's already familiarity with JavaScript, it just gave like additional functionality, or like does it do something that the other languages can't?
So that's a really good question. So there have been people who tried to get like Java and Python to work in the browser so that Java programmers or Python programmers didn't have to learn JavaScript. They were able to do front end and back end with one language. And that was initially what Ryan Dahl talks a little bit about in coming out with Node is instead of JavaScript developers being forced to learn Java or Python or C++ or one of these other back end languages, they would be able to program and do what these other languages do without having to learn another language. Besides that, Node.js is really good for like real-time communication because of its asynchronous nature. So typically with like a Python or a Java, if there are computational heavy programs, like you need to, let me think of how I can explain this. So basically with Java or C or Python, you'd be using in their nature, you're using like multiple threads of the CPU. So if you have 16 threads on the CPU and you have a program that's like computationally intensive, then you could spread that workload out on the whole CPU. With Node.js, they have that functionality built into it as well, but Node.js is also asynchronous by nature. So instead of having to spread it out, basically, let's just say you had to make a network call or a request to a server or something of that nature. In one of the other languages, you would wait for that request to come back before you do anything else. With Node.js, there are things called promises. So you send that request, and then the rest of the program can continue to run until that request comes back, and then you'll be able to continue. So there's differences as far as like their architecture goes and the nature of how they run, making Node.js better for real-time communication, like streaming, games, that sort of thing. So if you have a real-time communication app like Netflix, for example, Node.js would be really good for something like that. But if you have a computationally intensive application, you would want to go with like a Python or a Java because by nature they're just better. And you could run the computationally intensive programs with Node.js too, but you have to use workarounds, and you just have to. Yeah, you have to use workarounds. I'll just keep it simple.
I mean, would Discord be an example? Like, you said real time, like sending an instant message.
Yes. Yeah, so like there's streaming, there's voice communication. So I would consider that real-time communication. But I believe Discord is C++. I'm not positive, though.
Okay. I mean, you answered my questions now.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really good for real-time communication apps, though. And event-driven architectures. Like anything event-driven, because as we dig deeper into JavaScript, you're going to see like JavaScript is just event-driven by nature.
yeah. It's like the event-driven language, right? Like it's all
Yep.
based on what a user does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So a couple characteristics of JavaScript is it's high level, it's dynamic, and it's interpreted. So we'll go over high level first. What is high level? High level is just designed to be more human readable and abstracted from machine details. So that's one thing that JavaScript has in common with Python and Java is that they're all high level. They're easier to read for the human. They're more English-like than the other languages. We have lower level languages like assembly language, machine code, and Fortran. Middle level languages, which a lot of people these days still consider high level, but the beginning of high level languages because they are pretty readable, like C, C++, and Rust. Domain specific languages like SQL, HTML, and VHDL, which is like allows you to, we won't get too much into it, but it's like create logic for CPUs essentially. And then assembly language, which besides machine languages is low as it gets really. We won't go too much into any of these, but just to give you an idea of what high level is, it's just more, it's closer to English than these other ones here. Dynamic. I'm going to go ahead and just give you an example with the code here. So to explain dynamic, typically if I'm going to, let's just say I'm declaring a variable like a new number or something of that nature, I could just say new number. And I don't have to declare what type this is going to be. Let me go ahead and change this to JavaScript. I don't have to declare what type this is going to be. As long as down here, I could say new number equals 5, console.log new number, and then I could say new number equals 5, change it to a string, console.log new number, and if I go ahead and print these, you see it's going to print out the 5 and print out the 5. No problem. I could use the same new number variable to represent a number and a string. So that's dynamic where you're able to change the type. If you think, I'm going to give you just a little bit of info about TypeScript and what makes TypeScript different than JavaScript now is TypeScript is going to implicitly decide what a variable is, and here it's going to say any. So in this case, let me see if this actually runs. Node index cannot find module. Oh. Index.ts. So we're going to get 5 and 5, but if I wanted to with TypeScript, I could say this is supposed to be a number. Now it knows it's supposed to be a number. So now it's not, it removes the dynamic nature of JavaScript and turns it into a static language. So I'm actually declaring the type that I want my variable to be, and TypeScript is going to tell me here like, hey, this is actually supposed to be a number, it's not supposed to be a string, and I'll get an error. So if I change this to like 10, I could do that, and I'll get, oops, oh, I'll have to compile this down since it's TypeScript now before running it, but basically it checks to make sure that your variable is the variable that you say it's going to be, whereas the nature of JavaScript is, like I said, you don't have to have the consistent types. You can actually change the types midway through the program. Some people like this, some people don't like this. I like it for like prototyping, just to like get the idea of a program out there, see if it works on just a small level before actually building out a robust program with JavaScript. And then if I'm actually going to build a real program and dedicate time to making something good and scalable and robust, I'm going to use TypeScript for sure. And that's one of the reasons why people would use like a Java or a C++ or a C or one of these other statically typed languages, because they're not dynamic like JavaScript. But the dynamic nature of JavaScript increases the flexibility for the program, which a lot of people like. All right, so gave you just a little bit about JavaScript and TypeScript. What I said, JavaScript is dynamic by nature. You don't have to declare what type the variable is going to be, whereas the main thing that TypeScript is adding to JavaScript is that type system, where you're declaring like, hey, this variable here, it needs to be an object, it needs to be a function that returns a number, it needs to be a string. It's much more strict, which is a good thing. I know some people who work at Google too, and they're actually, from what I heard, moving away from Python because of the lack of the type system for Python, and they're converting a lot of programs from dynamic, similar to JavaScript, the loosely typed or less strict languages, to the C++s and the Go's and the more strict languages, because it just reduces bugs overall. And then interpreted. So interpreted is just, you're going to have programs that need to be compiled first, like a C++, a Java program. These go through a compiler and it converts your program into bytecode or machine code. With JavaScript, the browser is going to be executing JavaScript line by line. So there's no need to actually compile the JavaScript program. Portability inside the web context, you're able to pass a JavaScript program between any web browser. They're all going to be able to understand it. It's good for development and debugging, because with programs like C++ or Java, you are going to have to compile it to run it and test it out. Whereas with JavaScript, it just makes development a lot easier because you're able to just execute the JavaScript right away. And then with interpreted, it's going to be slower execution, because instead of just compiling the program ahead of time and having machine code or bytecode, which is going to run a lot faster on the CPU, it's going to be doing that conversion from JavaScript into bytecode or the machine language before it executes anything. So instead of taking that initial time to compile and then end up with a program that's lower level code that's going to execute fast, it's actually executing the JavaScript, converting it to bytecode. So it's like, in a way, doing the compiling on the fly. And then I will give you just a quick example of object-oriented versus functional programming quickly. That's the last slide there. I'll go ahead and just delete this. And so I'm just going to show you the structure of the different methods. So basically, we have functional, object-oriented, and so let's say we have let's just say we have a function that's like add to, something super simple, and we're passing in an x. So this is the number that we're passing in. We're just going to do return x plus 2. Very, very simple function. And this would be the functional style of programming. So then I would run the function. I would pass in, I could pass in 10. Let me go ahead and actually create like a couple variables. And then we could go ahead and execute this function with 10 passed into it, with 2 passed into it, with 3 passed into it. So this style right here is where you have the function and you're just passing a value into it, and then it's returning a value. Object-oriented would be where you're actually calling this function on an object. So let's say we're just creating a class called like test number, and we could just say its initial value, it's gonna have this dot initial equals 5 or something of that nature, and then we have add to. method inside of this class here. And we could just say so if we create a copy of this object, test number, let's just console it, see what we got here. We have our console.newTest. So we have our test number. The initial value is 5. If we go ahead and run new test.add2, you don't even have to pass anything into this. It's going to use the object that we created, and it's going to run this add2 method on this new test object. So we could go ahead and so we could see when we console.log out our test number initially, it's 5, but after we run the add2 method on it, it's now 7. So you could see, ignore this for now and just focus on this. With functional programming, you have a function and you're passing a value in, and the function is going to be modifying the value and returning a new value. There's actually no object here. It's just a function. You're passing a value in, you're returning a value. Whereas with object-oriented, you still have a function, the add2 function, but instead of passing a value into it, you actually have an object. You're calling that method on the object, and it's running the method on this object that contains the value. So this is the object-oriented style here. You have the functional, where you're passing values into a function, returning a value, and you have the object-oriented, where you're actually running a method on an object. But we'll get more into that as well. We're going to start with more of a functional style, just being in the browser, and then we'll move to more object-oriented programming in time as well.
So a quick question, Jim.
Yeah.
So basically, functional programming, you're just defining a function to just perform something, and then in object-oriented programming, are you like, I guess, when you create objects, you basically put multiple function in there that define the object. Like for example, I have car object, and I just have functions that determine like the trim levels and then like the colors. Like, does that make sense? I'm trying to like.
Yeah, with the object oriented, you're going to have the functions built right into the object.
Okay.
With functional, you're going to be passing an object into a function. So it's just a different way of doing the same thing, basically.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And then, all right, so that is the last slide there. Like I said, this is just like a snip of the PowerPoint. You guys can give me some feedback on this if you'd like, but basically this training here is part of a different training where now I'm going to transition into more of just like an overview of JavaScript, you know, going over objects, arrays, functions, just the classes, some more object-oriented concepts, that sort of thing. But from this point on, now we'll transition to the other training. So this one's interesting, and I'm actually really curious for your feedback on this one, because I showed this to a bunch of people and they're like, this is so different, but it's actually really cool. I'm going to try to move really slow through it and also do a couple detours and go down a couple rabbit holes just to provide you more information. The most important thing to me is that you guys understand the environment of the web and you have enough information where you could actually start developing your own programs and understand web development enough where you could basically build anything. So let me ask you something before we jump into this small little project we're going to do here. Who's seen this page before? Have either of you seen this before?
I've seen it before.
I've been on the MDM web docs, but not the web API specifically.
Okay. This page right here is probably the most important page besides just understanding the JavaScript language. The better you understand the JavaScript language just on a deep, intimate level, the better you're going to be able to be like creative and, you know, and just build new, imaginative, and just like the sky's the limit the more you understand the JavaScript language, because you really can do a lot and you could create brand new things. Now, as far as web development goes and building stuff in the browser, this is stuff that's already built that you can just use. Like, imagine if you sit down in a car and you have your steering wheel and you have like all the dials for your air conditioning and your music, and then like tilt your steering wheel up, move your seat back, move your mirrors, all that stuff. You have all these controls when you first sit down into your car, but you know what the steering wheel is, right? Like that, you know. The other ones you kind of have to figure out. So I expect the steering wheel to be like JavaScript, and everything else that you have to figure out is these controls right here. These controls allow you to manipulate, modify, and control the browser in ways that you wouldn't be able to if you didn't understand them. And so before I go into just building this project, let me see. I know both of you have probably seen this one, right? Console.log, for example.
Yes.
What do you,
Yeah, so console API is an API that, let me go ahead and just open up about blank so I could sort of like show you what I'm talking about. So this is the console. This console API is built into the browser. It's built into every browser. So if I go ahead and I'm looking at this console API, this is an API that every browser has access to, and I know that because if I click on the console API, so like I'm back here, I'm looking at all of the APIs. I click on console API and I go down. You could see that this console control is green in every single browser. So that means every single browser implements this command right here. So if I come down here and I say console.log hello world, it's going to print it. The browser understands this. Now, if I did this in a browser that didn't have console API built into it, then it would say undefined console trying to run log on an object that doesn't exist, or, you know, you'll get that undefined. You get that undefined error, but the console does exist. This is an object that exists in the browser. The people who built this browser built this console API into the browser, something that it knows how to do. Now, all these other ones, all these are also APIs that the browsers know how to use. Some of them are not widely built in though. So like XML HTTP request, that's how they use to send a request for data out to like a server from the browser. So the browser is like, hey, I need this data. You reach out to a server somewhere else and that server sends you the data. And you can see XML HTTP request is old. So it's built into every single browser. It's green across the board. Now, XML HTTP request also has things built into it that is not acceptable by every browser. So like the authorization header, it doesn't work on Chrome. It doesn't work on Edge. It works on Firefox. It doesn't work on Opera. It works on Safari. So you could see where these work. Now, XML HTTP request is the old way of sending a request for data. Now we use fetch. So if you scroll down to fetch, you can see fetch works across the board. You can see a lot more red. That's how you know it's newer than XML HTTP request. Usually it takes a few years to get it built into everyone. Then if we have like VR is deprecated, what do we have? Like XR? I think this is the new, yeah, this is the new one for augmented reality in the browser. Virtual reality and VR. And you can see this is not accepted in a lot of browsers. But you have the Chrome, you have the Edge, you have the Opera, Chrome, Opera, Samsung that have built this in. So you're able to use this pre-built functionality on these browsers. And so this is something just to keep in mind as you navigate these different web APIs, that if you're building an application that uses one of them, like you're using a virtual reality API, then your application is going to work on those browsers that have like green, but if it's red with an X, then you'll have to either one, build workarounds to get that code working, or build your own version of that for that specific browser, or you'll just have to make the decision to not launch on that browser. And then it's only...
Are these all written in JavaScript?
I don't know if they're written in JavaScript. They're probably written in the language that the browser is written in, like Microsoft Edge. They made their own design decisions what language to go with. Same with like Google Chrome. But I think most browsers these days are built on top of the Chromium open source browser project. And in that case, there's a lot of like C and C++. At least last time I checked out that code base, it was lots of C and C++. But similar to Node.js, on the bottom level, it's C or C++, but you're able to communicate with these APIs with JavaScript.
Yeah, I had no idea how that worked. I'm still pretty confused about like what an API is on its own. I feel like
It's just a control. It's just a control. It's just certain words. It's an object that allows you to communicate with certain functionality. That's all it is. So like this console API that I already showed you. There's console.log. Log is one of the methods on the console object that allows me to make the console do things.
So APIs are all objects?
APIs, yeah, you could say that. In this world we're living in here, yeah. They're all, so console is an
programming interface.
Yeah, console is an object with methods built into it. And you use this object to communicate with different features of the browser, basically.
Okay.
So we're going to be using a couple APIs today. One of them is the DOM. So the document object, it's going to allow us to communicate with... document object allows us to communicate with the DOM, so we're going to be able to actually modify the DOM. And then we're going to write a little bit of JavaScript code just to add some functionality to the different DOM object. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out, and we'll go ahead and... So what I'm doing here is I'm just communicating directly with the browser. And at the end of this training, I'm going to ask you like, hey, why can't we code like this? There's definitely a lot of problems as far as coding like this. But I wanted to give you a training like this just so you can see how you communicate directly with the browser without Visual Studio Code or any other tools like HTML files, CSS files, JavaScript files, and like it could get confusing when you include all that other stuff. This is just communicating directly with the browser. So let me go ahead and open up this here, and you guys could feel free to go ahead and type this out too, because what I'm doing is I'm just going to build a very small application by communicating directly with the browser. And so the first thing I'm going to do is, this is just an empty HTML. If we go back here and we look at this page, if you type in about : blank, it's just going to give you a blank document, like a blank canvas, essentially. The only thing that you have as far as elements in the DOM is the HTML element, the head element, and the body element. Those are always going to be there. Every web page is going to have those three things. And the HTML is just the document. It's the element that represents the document object. The head is a head element. The body is the body element, and even behind the scenes, we're using HTML to represent these objects, but inside the browser, they're objects. And so let me show you something here. like I said, the HTML is the document object. It's the HTML code that allows you to represent the document object. But if I want to show you what the document object is, I could go ahead and just type document, and this is the document object. So boom, we have our HTML, our head, our body. And now inside the document object, there lives a ton of methods. And there lives a ton of methods that allow you to create functionality inside the browser. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new element. And this element is going to be a div. And I'm going to store that inside the container variable. And so I'm creating a variable called container. This container is going to end up being an HTML element because I'm using the document object and the create element method inside the document object to create a div. Boom. And then this object exists, like inside the browser, this element exists only as a reference. So now this element is stored inside the memory of the computer, and the browser is only holding a reference to this. So it's like a number where if I go ahead and type container, you see we have a div here. We have this div that we just created. Now for the browser to get this right here, it just has its reference number. And when you type in container, like, hey, get me that container, the browser communicates with the operating system to reach into the computer's memory and pull that. Now, if I want to add that container to the DOM, then I have to do document body, because all elements live within the body, append child, and I would append the container onto the body. And so document also has the append child method, body has the append child, and this container also has append child. All the HTML elements have append child. So if you're an HTML element, your prototype, the element, actually gives you that method. And I could try to explain that a little bit better if that doesn't make sense. So the next thing I'm going to do is we just created the div element. We added it to the body. And so if we go back to our elements, we could see now we have a div here. We just added it programmatically. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm also going to create a header. So I'm going to say let header equals document create element. And this is going to be an H1 element. And for this one, I'm going to do header inner text equals task manager. And so elements also have this right here, the inner text, or inner HTML, or type, or ID, or style. Every element has access to a ton of different properties. Initially, these properties are set to null. They just don't exist. They're initialized with nothing. So they're like empty elements. But if you want to make an element more robust or add some characteristics or properties or give it some life, you're going to have to modify these elements and add stuff to them. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding an inner text property. I'm setting the inner text property of the header that I just created to task manager. So now if I go ahead and do header, you can see I have my H1. The inner text is task manager. And then I'm going to append this to the container. So I'll do container, append child, header. And now I'm appending this header to the container. Boom. And you can see it was just attached. And if we go back and we look at our elements, you can see we have our div, we have our body, we have our div, we have our H1. And so we're programmatically adding each element and appending them to the DOM. We're manipulating the DOM with this append child. when we're doing this create element, we're not manipulating the DOM. We're just creating an object that the browser has access to. But when we do this append child, or if we set inner text, we're manipulating the DOM, the document object model. So I'll go ahead and just breeze through this one real quick. So I'm going to say let task input. So I'm going to create an input, and let me ask you guys, what am I going to type? So let task input equals what? How am I going to create an input element?
Is there an append?
In HTML you can do an input tag.
What's up?
I said I know in HTML you can do an input tag, but I don't know in JavaScript.
Well, how did I create elements previously? How did I create the container element and the header element?
Document.create element.
Exactly. Document.create element. But this time, I'm creating an input element. So boom. Let's see what happens if, let's just say I'm creating a custom element, create element, and I'm creating Jim's custom. So I'm doing document create element, and the type of element I'm creating is Jim's custom. Let's see what this looks like. That doesn't even exist in HTML.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's not going to create anything, right?
It doesn't exist. So you're not getting an error, but that doesn't exist. It's still an element though. So it's still an element object. So the same way that all the other element objects have, like, you could add ID or class or any of those other attributes, you could still add these things to this element as well. But we're not going to do anything with this. I was just showing you if you play around a little bit.
Will that still display on the page though, or is it just useless, like it doesn't do?
It's not going to display anything if we don't add any text inside of it, but I'm pretty sure if we change the inner text of it and we append it to the container, then you'll see the text for sure. Yeah. So for the task input, we're going to change a couple of the properties. We're going to change this type because we want this to be a text input. So if I go ahead and just print out task input, you're going to see that now we have a type of text. So we're adding attributes to it. And then we're going to change task input ID equals task input. We're going to use that later. If I print out the task input, now we have a type and we have an ID on it. And then we're also going to set a placeholder equals enter a task. Boom. If we print out task input, now it has our type, our ID, and our placeholder. And then we'll append this input to our container. So we'll do container, append child, task input, boom. And now we have our input. So we just modified or manipulated the DOM with this append child. And then we're going to create a button. So we could call this one add button equals document create element. It's going to be of the button type. We're going to do add button inner text equals add a task. There we go. And then we're going to do container append child add button, and you can see now we have our add button here. Now there's no functionality attached to it, it's just HTML. The only thing we've added so far is just structure. And then the last thing we're going to create here is our task list equals document dot create element unordered list ul. We have our task list. We're gonna set its ID to task list. Oops. Task list. And then we're gonna do container append child task list. And it's here, you just can't see it because we haven't added any list items to it. But if we go back to our elements here, then you'll see we have our H1, we have our input, we have our button, and we have our task list. It's just invisible as far as we could see right now. So we're gonna add some styles to these 4 elements right here, and we're gonna add styles in 2 different ways. One way that we're gonna add styles is we're gonna add the style directly to the element. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do like we have our body here. We're gonna modify the style of this body by doing just document.body.style equal or document.body.style dot whatever property we're trying to change, and we're gonna set that to a string value. And then another way that we're gonna modify is we're gonna add styles to the head, and then we're gonna add classes and remove classes from certain elements. But first we'll just modify the elements directly, and then we'll do the other method. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna modify the body. So we're gonna do document.body.style.font family. We're gonna set it to Arial and sans serif. That should change the text in all of this. So once I press enter, you'll see the text change. Boom. So our text changed. Now I'm also gonna change document.body.display, which is just gonna give us the ability to change the display. Flex is very common. It's gonna allow you to use Flexbox, which just makes programming styles so much easier. And Flex is basically built into all the different frameworks like Tailwind and all that. It just makes organizing elements much easier. So we'll definitely get more into the intricacies of Flexbox later on. It's a concept that a lot of people find a little hard to wrap their heads around, but it's not too bad once you understand it. And I have some resources I could send to you both to make it a lot easier. So you'll notice just a little bit of change with the Flex, just like kind of spaces things out pretty nicely. So we changed the document.body.style. Now we're gonna do justify content, and we're gonna do justify content sent to center. That's gonna move us halfway across. Just center us perfectly in the middle of the screen. We're also gonna do align items, and these are flex directives here. We're also gonna do center. So with flex, we're able to just center it in the middle, center it again in the middle, and just make sure everything's good. Without Flexbox, that would be a lot more difficult. You'd have to use like some workarounds that are just a little bit more challenging, but Flexbox makes it easy. And then we're gonna change the height property. We're gonna set that to 100 VH, viewport height. So just the height of the body is gonna go from the top to the bottom. Whereas if you don't do that, then the body is just gonna end where the last element ends. And CSS, now you could see that I'm changing these CSS items, but in CSS, there's like hundreds and hundreds of different properties you could change to really get creative and have fun. And the people I know who are the best at this, they do that. Like they're either in graphic design or styling. Me, I kind of stray from the styling stuff. Honestly, I'm more into the functional backend type stuff. I'll do as little styling as I have to do just to make something look decent. But there's a lot to learn when it comes to styling, and you can get really good. So the last thing we'll do on the body is background color, and we'll just set this to a 444. And there we go. We have like a nice gray background. We're gonna modify. We'll actually just modify the container dot style dot padding. Actually, we'll do padding after background so we could actually see what padding is doing. So background is FFF. And you'll see the background of the container change. There we go. So it's just white. We'll change the padding to 20 pixels. There we go. So we just widen it out a little bit. We'll change the border radius. This is going to be a hard change to see happen. Border radius equals 5 pixels. That's just going to curl the edges a little bit. Right now they're perfect, like 90-degree angles, but this will give them just a little round to them. And then we'll do one more for the container. And we'll just add a box shadow just to make it look halfway decent. We'll set this to 0 pixel, 0 pixel. This is just giving like shadow to different parts of it. 0, 0, 0, 0.1. There we go. That should be good. And then it looks halfway decent. And then the last property we're going to change is just the add button. We're going to give it a little margin top to push it away from what actually, since the input and the box are on the same line, I believe it should push both elements down a little bit. So we could do add button dot style dot margin top equals 10 pixels. And that just makes it a little bit wider there. Does anyone have any questions about just adding styles directly? When we actually move on to the training next week, we're going to be building this same application, but we're going to be doing it with HTML files, CSS files, JavaScript files. And this is super tedious right here. And I don't recommend ever programming like this unless you're testing something out just to see how you could communicate directly with the DOM. Or you're just testing something out, but it's really, really good to see. Like, it's really good to see this so you could understand, like, why do we even need HTML files? Why do we need CSS files? And also what adds structure, what adds style, what adds functionality. When we add the JavaScript, you're going to see me press enter, but you're not going to notice any changes like you're noticing when we add HTML and CSS. When I add HTML, you're actually seeing like whole elements appear. When I add the CSS to the different elements, you're not seeing new elements appear. You're just seeing the current elements being changed in different ways. When I add the JavaScript, you're not going to see anything appear. You're just going to see me press enter. And then when things start changing is when you start clicking the buttons that the JavaScript was added to. But what questions do you guys have before we jump down? I have a little section about structure, and then I'll add the JavaScript, and then that's pretty much it right there. But we have an hour, so let's just take a minute to make sure everybody's digesting and all that.
I had no idea you could use CSS elements in the browser. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, every element has those properties on them. So every element that you create in the browser, let's just say, for example, you create a div, it has a margin top property. It has a color property. It has all those properties on it because it's an element. It has those properties on it. The thing is that those properties are set to default values, so you don't see anything.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. What's up, T? I didn't even see you pop in.
Hey, sorry about the delay. I got so caught up. I just got back from picking up my daughter, and yeah, from her aftercare. But yeah, I didn't realize it was at I was like, oh, I thought it was at 8, but then I realized I was like, oh no, I double checked, and I guess it started at 6. So anyway,
Yeah.
I made it. But I mean, I can always just look back at the YouTube video as well.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I'll post a video copy of it too for you. Yep, for sure.
There's YouTube videos of the lessons. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I post that. Yeah, because a lot of the people who come to these, they can't make it every single day. And so I like to have a copy of it just in case you miss a lesson, or especially with the data structure algorithm events, we do at 8. That's Monday through Thursday. And so that's tough to come every single day. So I just make sure it's available for everybody to watch later.
Got it. Okay. And
Yeah.
I did sign up for the data structures one too. That one is at 8.
Yeah.
You said okay.
Yep,
Thank you.
yep. Yeah, for sure. All right. What other questions do we have? Or just comments?
I was gonna comment. So when I was looking at, um, when you were going through how you do that HTML CSS, is that on VS Code? I'm sorry, I missed part of it. Is that on are you on a VS Code cloud?
Nah,
or-
I'm right in the browser. I'm right in
Okay.
the browser. So if you open up the browser and you navigate to about blank, it's gonna navigate you to an empty document. So it's
Okay.
basically like a blank canvas. It's
Oh, cool.
it's what a website looks like before you add any elements, any style, any JavaScript. It's just a blank canvas. And so I started quote unquote painting the canvas by communicating directly with the browser through the console.
Oh, that's so cool. So I thought about how that works. I know most websites are directed to some sort of server or some sort of I'm trying to think, a browser, if I'm not mistaken, right? Um,
Yeah, so the websites will live in the browser for the most part. Yep. And
okay.
the cool connection you're gonna see here is the same way that I'm using JavaScript to communicate with the browser through the console, is the same way that when I start using Node.js, I'm able to open up my command line terminal, and now instead of communicating with the browser, which in this console, the browser's console, I'm limited to only communicating with the browser. Like as far as like communicating in a language that the browser understands to make it do the things that I want it to do, I could use JavaScript to communicate it with here. JavaScript and web APIs. So we went over the web APIs. We use the web APIs and JavaScript to communicate with the browser. But when you open up the command line and you start using Node, then you could actually communicate directly with the operating system and the computer. So these are both the same thing. Here, I'm communicating with the browser. In the command line, I'm communicating with the computer. And you actually have like a ton more functionality. So it's like a much bigger world out here than being stuck in the browser. But it's nice to see the similarities and the differences.
Yeah, it looks like your task manager. It looks like an actual website that someone's working on, you know.
Yeah, that's the cool thing. And it's just an about blank page. So when we actually move to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, it's not going to say about blank up here anymore. It's going to, you're allowed to put an HTML file up here. And it'll be processing the HTML file. That's why when the browser is processing the HTML file, a lot of the mistake that people make is they don't link the CSS or the JavaScript to their HTML file, and they're like, how come I see my elements but I don't see the style? It's because the CSS isn't linked to your HTML. The CSS has to be linked to the HTML, otherwise the CSS won't be processed, and the JavaScript also has to be linked to your HTML. Everything has to be linked to the HTML page you're rendering in the browser, and that'll be right here. So if you have an HTML file just stored in like a random directory in your computer, you could drag it to the browser, drop it in here, and the browser will just like whatever elements you've built into that file will pop up. And so we're going to rebuild this application with files later. But after this training, I'll ask you guys even why you think we should be doing that and not communicating with the browser the way we're doing in this video here.
Okay,
Yeah.
that works.
All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I just added styles directly to the body, to the container, and to the button. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a style element. So the same way I created a container element, an add button element, the add task input, the container, I created those elements. I'm going to create a style element. And now the functionality of this style element, the inner text of our add button element is add a task. So if I go to our elements and I say like, oh, and you could just see when I did like container dot style dot, I was adding inner text to this style. So I was adding the styles to the elements. But if you look at the inner text of the add button, you see it's just add a task. Now we're also going to be able to add style elements, but inside of our style elements, it's basically CSS code. So the style elements will place inside the head, and inside the style elements, we could just write pure CSS if we wanted to, but I'm going to wrap them in quotes just so it actually works. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do document.create element. It's going to be a style element. And I'm going to call this completed style. And this is just going to be the style of a completed task, essentially. And the reason why we're not adding it directly to an element and taking it off is because we want the JavaScript code that we write to modify the class of element. So when you click on something, the JavaScript code is going to run. It's going to add a class called completed style to an element. And then if you click it again, it will remove that completed style class. So we're going to create a completed style element and we're going to put it in the head. And that way that style lives up in the head of our document. And anytime we add a completed style class to one of our elements, then that style will be applied to the element that has that completed style. But let me go ahead and just do it and you'll see what I'm talking about. So we have our completed style. I'm going to go ahead and do completed style dot inner HTML, since this is inside of the HTML, and I'm going to set that to dot completed. So I'm basically writing CSS here. I'm going to do text decoration, and that's going to be line through. So anytime we have a completed task, it's going to put a line through it. And that is it. That's the only thing we're going to do to it for now to keep it simple. And then we're going to do document dot, instead of body, we're going to do head, because the styles we actually add to the head. And we're going to append child, and that's going to be our completed style. And now once we click enter there, we can go back, and now our head actually has a style element inside of it with some CSS written inside of it. So now we have style that's added to our head. Now, the funny thing about this is I'm showing you how to write CSS by adding CSS directly to an element, and I'm showing you how to write CSS by adding it to the head. But in all reality, we want to separate concerns. We don't want any CSS inside of our HTML. So I'm showing you right now 2 ways you can do it, but 2 ways that you shouldn't do it. So keep that in mind.
Do you know the terms that you use to distinguish HTML and CSS?
Just like separation of concerns, I guess.
Yes. Yes, something like that.
Yeah, it's just separation of concerns. Like structure, you want to have structure in just the HTML file. You want to keep your style in a CSS file, keep your JavaScript in a JavaScript file. But a lot of frameworks kind of destroyed that concept because React has components have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all built right into them depending on the design decisions you make. But for now, we want to just keep concerns separate. Well, starting next training, we'll keep concerns separate. But that's what it's called, separation of concerns. Today, we're just adding it all into the HTML file. So the next one we're gonna do is we're gonna create another style element just called remove button style. And we're gonna say document dot create element, same thing, a style element. We have that there, and we're gonna do remove button style dot inner HTML equals, and then we're gonna write a little bit more CSS. So this is gonna be called, this class is gonna be called remove button, and inside this class we're just gonna do margin left equals 10 pixel. We're gonna do color equals red, and we're gonna do cursor equals pointer. So you could see that I'm structuring it in a way like that's what your CSS is gonna look like anyways, but I'm just programming the CSS into the element. So we have that, and then we're gonna do document dot head dot append child, and we're gonna add that remove button style element to the head of our CSS. And now you can see we have our style, two style elements, both of them contain CSS, and so those are there. And now we're gonna build our JavaScript. So this is actually gonna be a little tricky just because writing JavaScript into the console is super tricky, especially when you're writing functions. But let me go ahead and do my best. If I even have one little error anywhere, I'll have to write it again. So this is just, I don't like writing JavaScript. I don't think anyone likes writing JavaScript into the console. I wouldn't recommend it. I'm only doing this for instruction purposes, but I'm going to go ahead and call this function add task. If anyone sees any errors, let me know, and just let me know before I press enter so I don't have to do this more than once. So we have our add task function. We're going to create two variables initially once we get inside the function. So anytime we execute this function, we need a way to target certain variables. And so we're going to create two variables, one called task input to target the task input, and one called task list to target the task list. And this is just so like if we need to modify or change or pull the value from any of this stuff. With the task input, we want to pull the value. With the task list, we want to add an element. And so to pull the value from the input, we're going to need to actually target this element and pull the value from it. And to add something to the list, we're going to need to say like, hey, JavaScript, add this to that list. And to even point to that list to say that's the list we want to add it to, we need to target it. And so what we're going to do is we are going to say task input equals document get element by ID. And we're going to do task input. Remember when we gave this task input an ID of task input? Now we could actually target that input with its ID. And so same thing, we're going to do task list equals document dot get element by ID. I think we called it task list. So now we have two variables where we could target those two elements. We could target this input with the task input and the task list with this task list variable here. We're going to check to make sure that the string entered is not an empty string with task input's value property. So now I could check, I have access to this task input. So I could say if task input dot value equals empty string, then I just want to run some code. I just want to alert the user that there's no input and that we require an input, and then I just want to break out of this function. I don't want to do anything else. I just want to stop it right there and just give the user an opportunity to enter something for real. And so I guess we'll do alert, please enter a valid input. exclamation point, just so they know we're serious. And then we'll do return. So return will just break us out of this entire function, and it won't execute anything else underneath this. So task input dot value. So you can see even our task input has a property called value on it. And if I don't do anything, like if it just says enter a task and I haven't entered anything, then the value is going to equal an empty string. But once I modify this, now the value has changed and it's not an empty string anymore. It's Gregor or whatever. And so it will just skip this. This code won't run. But if it's empty like this, this code will run. There'll be an alert that pops up here saying enter a valid input, and we'll break out of the function. All right, so now we have access to the 2 elements we need access to. We check to see if our input is empty. All right, now we know that there is a string there. There is a task that was entered for sure. So we're going to create a new element. Who remembers how to create an element? A list item. How are we going to create a new element?
Container dot. Oh wait, no. Add. See, I forgot. I'm sorry.
It's all good. This is what it's all about.
Add element. Document dot add element.
Close. It's create element,
Oh, create element.
but almost the same thing. So this element is going to be a list item. The li, you see the unordered list is empty because we don't have any list items yet to it. So we create that list item now that we know we have actually a task that was entered. And now we're going to say list item dot inner HTML equals, and we're going to create a template string. So this is going to create the content that's actually inside of the list element. And so the first thing to add to the template string is the value of the task inputs value property. And so we'll do $ curly braces so that we could actually enter a value with JavaScript. And so we're going to take this task input value, and that's going to be the first thing we add as the inner HTML. So we added our task input value. If we didn't put the $ in the curly braces, then it would just add task input dot value as a string. It wouldn't actually extract the value out of the task input and inject it into the string as the actual value we entered here. You would literally see task input dot value. Like those are the, you would see TASKINP, like you would see those letters written out. But since we put it in the $ in the curly braces, what it's doing is taking that task input dot value, extracting that value. So the string that we actually typed into the task input, that value, and it's injected it into the string. So we'll actually see whatever was entered into this input here instead of seeing these words here.
Jim, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Question. So like,
Yeah.
can you explain again? Like, how does it know to put the element inside the unordered list element? Because to me, the way I guess I looked at it, you're just putting a li, like a list element or list item anywhere, and I thought like you
Yeah.
could nest the list item inside of an unordered list.
Exactly. That was a really nice catch too. And so right now we haven't modified the DOM at all yet. All we've done so far is create the list item, and now we're adding robustness, and we're adding stuff to the list item. So we actually haven't added this to the unordered list yet.
Okay.
Yeah, we created the element, and now we're adding stuff to the element. We're modifying the element, and then we'll latch that element onto the unordered list. We'll attach them. The second thing to add is a span element. So we'll actually add an element inside here. Since it's inner HTML, we can do that. If it was inner text, you would just actually see the span. And the class attribute we'll add a class to it, and we'll add an onClick. So the class is actually going to give it one of the styles we created in the head, and the onClick is going to give it some functionality. The class attribute should be set to remove button. So we'll set this to remove button. So this span is going to have the style from here, remove button style. So remove button, you can see the dot remove button. We're adding that class to the span. And so that span will have a 10 pixel margin on its left. The color of the span will be red. So we're actually going to add an X here because it's just an X to click. And when you click this X, this red X, there's going to be a pointer. And then we also have this on click. So we'll add some functionality into that as well. The onClick attribute should be set to remove task. And so we'll set this to remove task. Boom. And we haven't created this remove task function yet, but this is a function that's just going to allow us to actually remove a task from our unordered list. This function that we're creating is add task, but when we add a task, we also need a way to remove a task. And to remove a task, we're going to build that into each and every task that shows up.
And you don't need the $sign there before?
No.
Okay.
We only need the $sign to extract a value from a variable. But this is actually going to be, this is actual HTML text. And so, yeah, the more you write HTML code, you'll see this right here, on click. Hold on. You definitely don't need the $sign. But it might actually be, I don't think it's curly braces. I think it's just the strings. Remove task. Yeah, we'll try that out. Yeah, so remove task function we're about to create with the this object passed into it. Nah, it is the curly braces. We'll try it like this because it's okay to make some mistakes, and if we get an error, we could just press up and the whole function will recreate itself. And then the content of the span is an X. So this whole span element, we just want it to be a single X with our remove button style and our remove task function. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add an event listener to this new list item. So we're going to do list item dot add event listener. And inside the event listener is going to take two arguments. One of them is going to be the type of event, and the second element is going to be a function. And so the type of event is just going to be a click. When we click on this list item, we want to execute a function. And the function we want to execute is a function that adds a class to the list item. So when we have like our list of items down here, as let's say we enter a task, add task, enter a task, add task, enter a task, add task, we should have 3 list items down here. When we click on one of these list items, so click, then we want to add a style to it. And the style we want to add to it is this completed style. So we just want to add the text decoration line through. And so this event listener that we're adding to the list item will listen for an event specifically for the click. When we click it, it'll add that class. It'll modify the class list of this item, and it'll give it the completed. So it'll just put a line through the list item. So let me go ahead and just do a function. With the click event as its first argument and the function as the second argument. The only thing this function does is take the this object and modify its class list. And so we are going to do this dot class list dot toggle toggle completed. So either completed is there on the class list or completed is not there on the class list. And then this. Yeah, I don't think I need to add that in there either. We should have access to this right here since we're running it on this object. Since this object is the one that we're calling this function on, then this function will have access. Let me just make sure. It looks like we have an extra bracket here. I'm going to use the old method of functions to make sure we have access to the this. And parenthesis, or yeah, right there. That should be good. So we have our click as the first argument, then our function as the second argument, and all of it nested inside of these two parentheses. All right, cool. So that should be good right there. Christina, this is what you just pointed out. Now we're going to go ahead and do task list dot append child, and it's going to be our list item. So now we're actually adding the list item to the task list. So set the task list. Next, append the list to the task list. UL element. Set the task's input value property to an empty string. So at this point, we still have a string right here. And if the function makes it to this point and we actually do add the list item to the list, we want to make sure that this goes back to our placeholder and there's not still our old task. We want to kind of like refresh the input. And so we'll do task input dot value equals just empty string. We want to reset that to an empty string. And then so we actually want to add this on task. I'll wait for that. I'm gonna challenge you guys on that one. All right, so we created this function, but we didn't add it to anything yet. It just exists. The same way that we created like document.create element and the element existed, but we haven't appended it to anything. Same thing. We created this add task function, but we haven't added it to anything yet. So just keep that in mind. All right, so we have that. Let me see. So we have our function that's living inside the computer's memory, but the browser has a reference to it right now. So if you ever want to use it, the browser has a reference that points to that function and it'll execute it. And then last, we'll create our remove task function. And this is the last function, and then we'll test everything out. And so pass an argument titled element to it. So you could see in this remove task up here, when we added it, we're passing in this. So this is actually the list item right here. And so when we pass this into it on the onClick, we're passing in the list item because this is the HTML for that item. So since we're changing the inner HTML of this object right here, the this that we're passing into remove task is this item that we're modifying. And so when we pass element into the remove task here, when we're defining our function, if we added this function to another element, like the container, if we did like container.inner HTML and we created a different element that's like a button and we did onClick remove task this, it's not going to be the list item that this is pointing to. It's going to be the container that this is pointing to. So that this is referencing the item that we're actually modifying. And then inside the function, run the remove method on the parent node property of the element. So we just do element parent node. So you could actually target parent nodes or child nodes. And then we just remove. And yeah. Unexpected identifier. Oh, spelled. Can anyone find a mistake in this? I'll give you a hint. It's not inside the function.
It says unexpected identifier, remove task. Where is the identifier?
This is an identifier.
Okay.
An identifier is just like the word you use to identify a variable or a function or anything you create, basically. I just spelled const wrong.
You misspelled, yeah. I saw C-O-S-N-T.
Yeah. There we go. So we have that. This exists inside the browser. The browser has a pointer to this. So anytime you want to execute this function, the browser will point to that. And we've actually added this to our list item element. So let's go ahead and just like do laundry, add task. This button's not working. This function's not working. What's wrong here? What's the issue with the button? How do you think we find out what the issue with the button is?
Are you calling it?
We're supposed to be calling something when we click this, right?
Yes.
What are we supposed to be calling?
The add task function.
Exactly. How do we know if the add task function is connected to the button?
And yeah, you have to write a task, right, to check it.
We could check it. We could check it in elements. So let's check it here. So this is the button. How do we know if the function is attached to it?
Can't you write write a function?
We already wrote the function. So the function exists. This is our add task function.
Mm-hmm.
That exists.
Are you supposed to add an event listener? But I thought we did that already with the click.
We did add an event listener to the list item, but we haven't added an event listener to the button. And you could see that there is no onClick function here. We have a style attribute, but we don't have an onClick. So there's a couple different ways we could do this. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's the onClick function in. I've never done this in the console before, so this is all foreign to me. But I know there is an onClick event.
So add button.
Mm-hmm.
Let's check that out. So that's nothing. What if add button dot onClick? Let's see what that is. It's null. Okay. So it's null. It's supposed to be a function. So how do we change that?
I know you attach it to what you have already. Like you attach it to the button. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we could do like add button dot add event listener, and we could do click and do add task. Just add that function there. So when we click, or you could even do add button on click equals add task. So
Okay, that's easy.
either one of those ways work pretty much. And now do laundry, you see do laundry.
Ooh.
And we do like other chores, add task. We see slack a little, right? Take a little break. And so the add task function is working. The first thing we're doing is we're targeting the task input, targeting the task list, so we have access to those. Now, let's just say we don't enter anything. What if we click add task and we haven't entered anything?
We get the alert.
Exactly. Please enter a valid input. Okay. So if it's an empty string, we'll get this alert and we'll break out of the function. Otherwise, we'll create our list item. We'll create our span. So the task input dot value is whatever we entered here. And then the span is this X. This X is red because of the class that, or because of the style element that we added to the head before we even wrote any JavaScript. And if we click this red X, we should execute the remove task function on this element, on this object. So if I click the X, I remove it, and we just remove it by running this element, parent node, remove, and the parent node is responsible for removing this element.
I'm gonna drop off real quick to eat dinner, and then we're still doing data structures at 8.
Data structures algorithms at 8, yep.
Okay, yeah. So, I'll
But
be back
yeah,
in a few minutes.
yeah, that's basically that right there. So that's the training. I'll stay on for a couple minutes just to answer questions from Christina or T. Alex, enjoy your dinner. I'll see you at 8 if you hop back on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. See you guys.
Cool, cool. See ya.
Bye. Is the code all gone already? Did you exit out?
I didn't exit out. So we have all the code written right here, but that's another thing. I do want to close out just so you could see the major problem with programming like this. And the major problem with programming like this is if I close this, if I click this X, or if I refresh this, it's all gone. Nothing survives. There is zero persistence. It all disappears.
Can you do this to make it easier? Like, can you do the code in like your text editor and then just copy and paste it over to console? Does that? I don't know if it works. So like, in the event you do accidentally refresh it or your browser crashes or something, all of it isn't gone.
That's actually what we're going to be doing next Monday. Next Monday, I'm going to give you guys the requirements. We're going to be working in Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to have you all create an HTML file, a CSS file, and a JavaScript file, and you're going to recreate this website. And I'm just going to I'm going to ask questions, but I'm going to try not to give you any answers.
Okay. Yeah, it just makes it easier to read if it was like in a text editor. That's the only thing.
Oh my goodness, so much easier to read. So much easier to manage, so much easier to just save, change, add to. It's just, yeah. I get it. I wanted to give this perspective, and it was super tedious for me too, even building this. I'm like, but I wish that when I had first started, when I was newer, that someone would have showed me that you could communicate directly with the browser just like this. So one of the main reasons for a training like this is, one, showing that you could communicate directly with the browser. Excuse me. Two, it's to understand the importance of the files and the persistence and that sort of thing. And another reason why this is super important. There was something on the tip of my tongue. Oh, man. I wanted to introduce you guys to the APIs, like the console and the other web APIs, because you're able to use the same way we use JavaScript and we use the console APIs. You're able to use the other APIs right in here. And then also these developer tools, so like the elements, the console, these, every newcomer should definitely understand these. But as we start getting into more advanced topics of web development, it's super important to just understand all of these as well. So we'll deep dive into all this stuff. Learning how to make sure our network requests are working properly, the performance of our application is good, our storage, whether we're using storage APIs. So like network is going to be like our XML HTTP request or fetch. We have performance APIs, we have memory APIs. And so as we explore more of these MDN web APIs, we'll explore more of this too. These are just like tools every web developer needs to know.
Yeah. Have you heard of Viewer as an API?
Viewer?
I think so. Yeah, Viewer.
I've heard of Vue. Are you talking about the JavaScript framework or something else?
I think so. I think it's Vue. Yeah, I think it's Vue. Is that an API? Do you know?
I'm pretty sure you would consider that like a language or a framework. I would consider it a framework because it uses JavaScript and yeah, it's like a framework. It's like React or Angular.
Yeah, what exactly? Okay, yeah, I have to do my research before I ask stupid questions because, I mean, you can just go online and find out, right? But I just, you know, it's hard to find people to talk to about stuff like this and stuff like what we're doing right now is so amazing because not every day do you get to talk to people that do this stuff and you do this stuff, so and you know this stuff, so yeah.
Yeah, I dabble.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm gonna focus heavy on JavaScript because if you understand JavaScript on a fundamental, just intimate level, then you're going to be able to jump to any one of these frameworks. Like if a job is like, hey, we need you to learn Vue, it's going to be so easy to learn Vue or React. But if you just start learning React and you don't understand fundamental JavaScript, then moving from React to Vue is going to be a little bit more challenging. I know people who started learning JavaScript like back when JavaScript first came out, and the only thing they've ever done was just vanilla JavaScript. Like everything they build is just with pure vanilla JavaScript, no frameworks, but they work on applications with React or Angular or Vue or Svelte or any one of these other JavaScript frameworks, not because they understand these frameworks, but because they just have such a deep understanding of JavaScript that they could explore these other worlds easily. So there's going to be times, I know people who just learned React without learning JavaScript fundamentals, and the job was hiring for Angular, and they got rejected because it's like they just didn't have the JavaScript fundamentals. So that's like the most important thing to me, is that you all learn JavaScript and learn the fundamentals really well, because that's going to make exploring all these other worlds of frameworks and exploring Node.js so much easier.
How do we access the YouTube videos?
I could send it to you, so I should just post a link here in the server so everyone has access to it. Here we go. Channel. I'll go ahead. So we're in the introduction to JavaScript channel right now. If you look, we have an open chat, we have a create invite, and we have an edit channel. If you click on open chat, I'll post it right there. So there you go.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey Jim, sorry.
Hey.
I'm gonna try to go get like some a snack or something before 8 o'clock.
Yeah, I'm gonna unplug for a minute too.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
I'm hungry.
I hear you.
But I'll definitely see you at 8 o'clock.
Cool. I have a challenging one tonight. So it's it looks easy at first, but it's challenging. All right, I'll see y'all at 8. Thanks for joining.
Bye-bye.
See ya.